We're live. Hi, this is John Firth with Darren Moss in the next installment of our live LinkedIn Live events. This one is Are you insane or are you just an entrepreneur? It's about the myths and the realities of being an entrepreneur. And Darren has lived through this. We're both living through it again now, more as solopreneurs and entrepreneurs per se. So I wanted to make it clear that today's discussion is about young entrepreneurs who at some point in their 20s make the decision or have the decision made for them that they're going to become entrepreneurs. The other phenomenon is entrepreneurs, people who become entrepreneurs when they're over 50. So it's called suddenly 50, suddenly, over 50, suddenly an entrepreneur. And that's going to be in 2 weeks. But I'd like Darren to introduce himself. Most of you know me. I am a coach for CEOs and their leadership teams. I did work for corporate America or large corporations companies until about 8 years ago, when I decided the small and medium-sized business area was far more interesting and a lot more lively than working for corporate America or corporate world, anything. So Darren, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Darren Mass, and as John mentioned, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur since I was 9 years old.
I'm having trouble hearing you suddenly.
Okay. Try this. Better? Hello?
Let me make a check to see if it's just me. Okay.
Hello.
Oops, I've lost you.
Not a great day without a technical limitation.
Okay.
All right. Better?
No, I still can't hear you.
Okay.
Are you on mute? No, you're not on mute.
I am not on mute.
Do you want to come back in?
Sure.
Yeah, why don't you come back in? I'll entertain them. So sorry about that. So sorry about that. I think Darren, something happened to his sound. He's coming back in, and hopefully.
Hello.
There we go.
There we are. The magic of the world. Yes. So I'll start over. I'm Darren Mass. As John had mentioned, I am an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. My first entrepreneur foray was when I was 9 years old. And eventually I finally did something that succeeded in my late 20s and early 30s. And here we are today.
Excellent. And we did a LinkedIn Live broadcast about a month ago called There's No I in Entrepreneur. And you'd like to spin that now to the next subject of today, which is?
Oh, there is an I in insanity. And are you insane? And yes, the reality of an entrepreneur is you have to have a momentary lapse of insanity in order to either leave a really well-paying job or any job, or tell your family that, hey, I'm going to go out on my own because this idea that I have is so phenomenal, so much better than anyone else's. It's going to improve the world. It's going to make the world a better place. That's insanity.
That's insanity. Well, I always talk about the Don Quixote effect, which is these guys and gals have all these great ideas and everybody thinks they're crazy because the ideas sound crazy. But the difference between Don Quixote and a successful entrepreneur is an entrepreneur knows how to take the idea and then turn it into something.
Although Don Quixote did have Sancho Panza by his side.
True. Right. So he wasn't a loner.
And we did talk about how there's no I in entrepreneur.
Right, exactly. We'll go back to the whole question of what is a myth and what is reality. But let's talk a little bit about your experience and your momentary lapse of sanity that turned you into a very successful entrepreneur.
Yeah, I would say it was a momentary lapse of reason.
Thank you. All right, good.
Yeah, so I had the entrepreneurial spark, at least for the last company that I had. I woke up in the middle of the night out of a dream and had the name, had the vision all in my head. And that moment, I realized that I'm insane. Everyone around me that I told, my family, my friend, my mom, my dad, why would you quit this really awesome job you have? You're at X position and you manage people and all that. And I didn't see any other risk. I didn't see any failure. I didn't see any setbacks. And that cloud of reason that comes over the normal adult brain didn't exist. That to me is what brings the insanity portion into being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly it. When you're young, you haven't even learned what it means to be reasonable, to weigh different risks, to be careful about certain things. You probably don't have a family yet. You may not even have a piece
I had a
of
dog.
property. Yeah, a dog. Yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't even have that when I was started. I started out as a solopreneur, and now I'm a solopreneur. You have a mindset. I want to go where I want to go, and a mindset that why not? Why shouldn't I?
That's a bit of naivete or a chutzpah.
Right.
It's as we get older, we have learned behavior, and that learned behavior really embosses or embellishes fears of failure, fears of embarrassment, fears of vulnerability and not succeeding. And that can hold you back from really jumping out off of the ledge to being an entrepreneur and starting that thing that you really want. So with my example, I have a few people in my family that were entrepreneurs, my grandfather, my uncle, my father even. And I had called my uncle up after my mom told me that I was insane for quitting this great job that I had. And my uncle had said to me, listen, you are not 30 yet. By the time you turn 30, if you don't embark upon your idea, your dream, you are going to wonder what if, and you will regret it for the rest of your life. Right. And it was those words that I took to heart, and he was right. And if I didn't jump off that ledge to start my business, I would never have achieved what I truly wanted to achieve. And that was, the myth of being my own boss or being that entrepreneur and creating something that was really special in the industry that I was in.
Although that in itself has generated a myth, which is that you have to be an entrepreneur by 30 to be successful. The fact is that there are more people over 50 who are entrepreneurs. Now, success is all about how you define success. But in terms of the number of people who are trying to build something of their own, over 50, there are more of us over 50 than under 30.
Well, I would say today, based on the last 2 years' experience, there are more entrepreneurs than ever before. People who are working from home, had a great concept or idea. Dare I say, some, if not many, are moonlighting, still getting paid from their existing company while they work on their other idea. It happens, but I think now more than ever, there is a great opportunity to go out on your own with the flexibility of not having to bear certain expenses as in the past. When I started my business, we had to have an address. You had to have an office. You had to have a conference room. You had to have a telephone system with telephone numbers. You had to have lots of things that cost a lot of your capital, to take up capital. Today, you can start a business just out of thin air. Poof, there is a business. Right. And your address can be either a co-working space or you don't even need an address.
Yeah,
I need an address. I've come across lots of new startup businesses that don't even have a phone number.
So do you think
that's crazy? But it's
I know.
That's the way the world is today. We can communicate.
I have trouble dealing with, but quite honestly, I don't answer any phone right now that the phone number is not one I recognize immediately.
Same, and I think most people are like that. But even in business, though, it's a lot faster and easier to connect over messaging apps or chat bots or what.
Absolutely. So you brought up a couple of things that are myths. I'm very interested in the one that that you brought up, is that entrepreneurs have to be confident. Is that a myth? Is that true, false?
Entrepreneurs have to be confident, right? If you're not confident and you don't believe in what you are about to embark upon, that your idea is great or better than or an improvement to, then essentially you just have a concept and it has no chance to truly succeed.
And yet, succeed being the operative word, because we do know people who have generated a lot of cash flow, short-term made a lot of money based on charisma and their idea. The founder of WeWork, whose name escapes me right now, Adam Newman, I think.
Yep, Adam Newman.
And then Elizabeth Holmes being two prime examples of young entrepreneurs who were running after something that was a house of cards.
Yeah, I would say there's another word we could use for them, but yeah, if you don't truly believe that what you have created or your concept is the best, then how can others believe it? Now, there is a concept that's, I would say fraudulent or
Mhm,
nefarious means,
mhm, mhm.
where you truly don't believe that what you're about to embark upon is the be all end all of the best product or
Right, yeah,
service,
that's one.
but you are manipulating others to believe in such, and that has a nefarious, you
Yeah,
know,
I
connotation to it.
yeah, and I see, they were both under 30, so they fit the mold of what we're talking about now. I believe they actually truly believed. What they didn't understand is there's a difference between conviction and commitment and being open and vulnerable to possibilities that your idea has some flaws, as opposed to they believed that belief was a tunnel vision. You couldn't move from your basic idea, otherwise you weren't being true to the idea or something. They turned it out to be highly inflexible in the face of obvious feedback. That's a belief. That's a dogmatic belief, as opposed
That's an insanity of being
yeah,
completely
that's
blind to reality, to believing too much in your own abilities, and not recognizing your own weaknesses and failures. That's a cultural challenge where you don't allow others to share input, and that kills the corporate nature or the feeling of culture within your company.
mhm,
But there was a line in the Elizabeth Holmes documentary where she said, "You have to fake it till you make it," right? And
mhm,
that is
mhm.
very true in any startup business. You have to fake it till you make it, or you have to act as if. I would walk around my office and say, we have to act as if we're a $10 million company. We need process procedures. We need to appear
Mhm,
bigger, because
mhm.
no customer would take their chance in bringing business or allowing us to work on their
Right.
business without that. But there's a difference. Faking
Mhm.
it till you make it and exaggerating the realm of reality is very different than creating a fraudulent con.
Right.
And in
Exactly.
those examples with those two individuals, they believed in their capabilities and abilities. They believed in what they were doing. They
Mm,
were right to fake it till they made it. But there is a line that they crossed where it crossed over into, now you're committing a fraud or a con,
right.
and you need to take a step back.
But as young people, so I'm perhaps more generous towards them. I think because they didn't know what they didn't know, and this comes to a myth, it was all about performance. The usual measures of performance were correct. They had investors falling over themselves. They were getting written up. They were highly successful on all fronts, except that their idea was inflexible and they couldn't read the tea leaves. They didn't have the maturity. Uh, and as I said, we're going to talk about over 50 people or entrepreneurs after 50, where it's probably just the opposite, is they see all the risks and they know all the things that go wrong, and that paralyzes them. I think they were two individuals that got swept up in all the trappings of success,
Yeah.
but didn't have the experience, maturity, and the ability to look inside and to see warning signs that would make them go, great, all right, I just raised, I have a valuation of $9 billion, but the product still doesn't work.
But
It,
you could say the hype got the best of them.
yeah, and they were just not mature enough to cut through that,
Correct.
um, which is another myth. Comes some myth. You talked about culture. That there's a myth that performance trumps culture as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I would say that's definitely a myth. You start a business because you want performance, right? You start a business whether it's for revenue growth or changing the world or doing something, noble and great. You still
Mhm.
need performance.
Right.
And you can't have a great culture if you don't have great success. Nobody wants to feel great about being on the losing team,
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
right? So performance, you can derive a great culture from exceptional performance.
Mhm.
You can only be the cheerleader of a failing company for so long before your employees start feeling that pressure as well.
Yeah. Um, which will bring me to another point, which is, I think, stuck between myth and truth. But yeah, I think Travis Kalanick with Uber is a perfect example. He started out with a very aggressive, no prisoners, or what is it, take no prisoners culture. And when they grew to be 12,000 employees, he hadn't thought through what it means to be a large company.
Yeah.
And he still had this small company attitude, and things just started breaking and burning. I mean, there were lawsuits for workplace harassment. There were municipalities that got freaked out because of these behaviors. The culture had not grown up with the size of the company.
Well, that's a classic case of being too big for your britches.
Yeah.
Right. Where essentially, just because you started the company, just because you grew the company, doesn't mean you're the experienced one when the company changes and morphs. When your company goes from private to public, that's a very different world, different entity, and requires a new change in management, or at least the board that can oversee the company as it grows into that next iteration. Right. Very different world there. And unfortunately, the ego sometimes comes into play when you're an entrepreneur seeding an idea. It grows up into something big. All of a sudden, it's very hard to face the ego or to push back on the negative portion of the ego, which is, in that example, what happened.
Right. Which is, again, this whole thing about being over 50. Many people start as entrepreneurs have been highly successful in companies other than their own.
Correct.
And then success not being successful, because there's always moments that are difficult, that where you think you're a failure, becomes that much harder because you've never actually really faced failure, where maybe not necessarily in the case of a 55-year-old, but certainly there's always a chance of an existential collapse, that you're not making money, that you suddenly have nothing to show for your efforts. Literally, you spend all the money.
There's a greater than not likelihood as an entrepreneur for the first time, you won't make money.
Right.
Right. And if you do, if you're wise about it, you reinvest every dollar back into the company, and you won't make money for a while. For me, I didn't pay myself for a little over 3 years. I lived off of a credit card, an interest-free credit card. So I used tools that were out there, but every dollar of revenue or profit went straight back into the machine. I would hire people way before I would take a dollar.
Yeah. Now you bring up a very interesting point. My work with entrepreneurs, the number one moment where I get worried about them existentially and the company's existence is when they say, I have a month left and then I can't pay, I can't pay my employees. That is a very scary moment. Probably the scariest moment, I would think, for any entrepreneur, is when suddenly you realize what sort of a short leash you're on.
An incredibly short leash. I mean, you need to have a good, healthy amount of runway in your personal life as well in your business life. I'd say not every entrepreneur fully understands the mechanisms of business, right? They don't understand P&Ls or GAAP accounting. It's, for me, I didn't know what it was like to be a CEO, and I didn't know what it was like to be an entrepreneur. I had a great idea. I had found some great partners, and we just ran with it. And back to what you were saying, when I was young-minded, I didn't see the risks. To me, the worst case was moving back home with my parents, taking my dog with me, right? Or I go and get another job. There was not as much to lose, but that still is a level of insanity, because I had to leave a company that was doing exceptionally well, and I was well, regarded in the company, and I enjoyed the company.
So here's another myth: entrepreneurs have to be fearless.
Fear keeps us grounded. If you were fearless, you would touch the hot stove, jump out of a plane without a backup parachute. So you do have to have some fear. Fear is what drives us. So there also needs to be a sense of fearlessness. So that's kind of in the middle, true and false. Because you have to push past and ignore the fact that you're going to fail. At least once or twice, you are going to stumble as an entrepreneur. And that's good. We learn from those stumbles. We learn from failure. That's how we learn not to touch a hot stove, right?
Exactly.
See, with my kids, I tell them not to do something, they do it. I don't tell them not to do something, they learn real quick.
That's what, well, in my case, I don't know if you've run across it with your coachees, but with the people I work with, there is a technique, if you want to call it that, of leading or letting them go to the edge of the cliff, look down, and then yanking them back right before. And that momentary scare finally impresses upon them something that they otherwise wouldn't have learned.
Yeah, if you think back at all the biggest learning lessons that you've had in your life, it's because you've either failed or recognized or remembered a historical moment of failure, and that helped steer you into the right decision.
Right.
You know, I've had plenty of those situations, and you know, I've seen too many bosses, managers, CEOs, parents, even helicopter too often. And you know, when I coached these helicopter bosses, I ask them a simple question of, do their employees live up to their performance expectation? And the answer is always no.
Right. Oh, absolutely. If that's now, cash flow is the single greatest fear-making. This is the single greatest fear-making event. But I think the light goes off for most entrepreneurs when they get it. They realize that they don't have the team, the people, either because they're not willing to pay for them or pay enough for them, or they just don't get the fact that it's the same everywhere in the world. Cream rises to the top. If you're not trying to get the best talent you can get, chances are you're either going to burn out because you have to do the work, or success will always elude you.
Well, I think hiring practices are greatly flawed. Right? We need to start looking at not always hiring the best person, right, or that with the most experience, but hiring the person with the right personality, the right person for the right role, and then some. And I think we make a lot of more hiring mistakes than wins in you know, across all businesses, small, medium, large, enterprise, fortune, etc. Every business makes hiring mistakes constantly, and you get it wrong more often than not. And you know, I've often looked at hiring off of culture as the number one way to disseminate a great employee, potential employee versus not. Right? You have core values within a company, and if a candidate matches those core values, then sometimes you might get it wrong. You might hire the right person for the wrong seat, but that is the right person for another seat. So I think hiring practices need to be amended a little bit, and I coach on that as well. Is how to hire the right person, not the right candidate for the specific role, but the right person for the organization.
For the organization. And what I've discovered is inevitably, you know, people talk about cloning themselves. I think that's a myth, but I think people do hire people that they're comfortable with, that they like, that otherwise might have been friends, that there's some level where you have to have compatibility, because as the entrepreneur, and this is, I believe, is a truism, the values emanate from you. Now, you have to work through them, you have to think through them, make them very conscious, and there may be one or the other where you say, that is something I aspire to be more like that. But I think ultimately an entrepreneur is truly authentic. That's, I think, a truism. It's very hard not to be yourself as an entrepreneur. It's very hard not to be yourself in a corporate atmosphere, because you do have to modify behaviors to fit in to a culture that's not yours.
When you're an employee, regardless of the role within any corporation, you have to camouflage your personality. Entrepreneurs that are successful exude their personality. Their product is tied to their personality. Their goal, their ability to succeed and push past opposition is all part of their personality.
And behaviors. We know of several, especially out in Silicon Valley, there are some what corporate America would consider very dysfunctional behaviors.
Insane.
In some cases, one could say just Steve Jobs had a good dose of insanity. But we have sort of a codified series of behaviors that in corporate life are acceptable. I mean, I could say that 90% of core values across large companies kind of all look the same, because there is sort of standardized. In entrepreneurship, it's hardly standardized, and you get all sorts of types of people who are successful despite some very weird behaviors or insane behaviors. I want to take a pause here. We have comments. It's actually friends of mine or a former client and a fellow presenter on LinkedIn Live. That's Larry Reynes. And then former client of mine and good friend, Solomon Englander. So we know that we have at least 2 listeners right now. Although we don't have any questions, we invite questions. And let me just take a quick moment just to remind people of how to get in touch with me. There's my contact information, my email account, my telephone number, and this is my website address. And here's Darren's.
Notice no phone number.
Right. I was just going to say, consistent
I'm
with what
him.
you've been saying. Exactly. Um, let's go to some more. Let's go to some more myths. One of them is an entrepreneur has to, by nature, be a loner.
So an entrepreneur that's a loner to me would be more of an inventor, right? You, let's just break this into an entrepreneur doesn't always make a great CEO and doesn't need to be the CEO. The entrepreneur is the visionary behind the dream, behind the concept, but that doesn't make them anything great other than, great concept. If you're going to be an entrepreneur that's a loner, then you're not really selling your story, your vision, your mission. And you really, I don't see a lot of success coming from entrepreneurs that aren't visionaries if their intended purpose is to grow a company or start a big corporation. To me, that's more of an inventor.
And I agree with the first part. I think maybe we have to make it a little bit more differentiated. I think there are entrepreneurs who have a simple vision. They're entrepreneurs. They may not be impacting the world, quote unquote, but who take an existing business model, decide they're going to do it on themselves. They may not even do it better. So but the vision they have is a vision of success with that model. They still have a vision. So let's be careful with it. You don't have to have a grand sweeping, I'm going to change the world type of vision to be successful, but you have to be able to stick to the vision you created. I've seen too many entrepreneurs, and I include myself in that, who can't focus on this, find it very hard to commit to that one vision. Suddenly other things creep up, especially if you have a failure, whatever you want to call a failure. Suddenly they start thinking the shiny object is over there and not where they had it. I had one client that was definitely was chasing after the shiny object instead of having the vision that this is the way it is. Flexibility enough to make it consistent with the marketplace and demand. But there can be entrepreneurs who lose focus. But I think we have to be careful of what we call visionary versus just simply knowing what they have to do.
Well, more often than not, the visionary chases the shiny things, and you need the integrator to help guide that back and ground you. But entrepreneurs can also be, sole proprietors as well. Right?
Solopreneur, yeah.
Yeah. So you could be a solopreneur, which is an entrepreneur. Anyone who starts a business is an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah. And whether they're a solopreneur or, I don't know, do you have a good word for the entrepreneur who absolutely knows he has to build and wants to build an organization around him?
An executive.
Or a potential CEO.
Yeah, potential CEO, someone who has the vision, but the ability to, or at least the beginnings of the ability to achieve and execute on that vision. So you're really the executive or executor of the vision. But an entrepreneur doesn't need to necessarily be the leader of a company. There's the person that created the idea, the concept.
That's right? Very important.
If you look at Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin created the biggest search engine ever, ran the company with guidance until eventually the company grew outside of their capabilities. And that's when they brought in Eric Page.
Right.
I'm sorry.
No, Eric. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
I find on these things, like my capacity to remember names is very limited. Well, so now that's an example of where at some point on the road to building an organization and potentially becoming a CEO, sanity does have to somehow have its voice heard. And usually it's in the form of an advisory board, a board of directors, an outside third party that you trust, a coach, maybe even a friend. But that's totally an example of when sanity has to set in, is when you are not capable. And it's very often the case that, especially when a company gets sold to a private equity firm or what have you, or even an IPO, that executive cannot, or that entrepreneur just can't make the leap of faith. They can't change the way they're supposed to change. And that's when sanity has to, because if sanity doesn't intrude, or reasonableness, then they'll probably destroy the company.
Well, that's where you go from being an entrepreneur with an idea and a concept into creation of the company and formation. And that's where you have people and processes,
Right.
right? And once you start papering people and processes, you now have to have a sane model in corporate structure. And regardless of how much corporate you want to let in versus not, if you're looking to grow a concept and an idea into a business, the corporate model has to ensue, at least to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And if not, you're grabbing in every direction, you're being pulled in every direction. There's no clear marching orders, and it's going to be a lot harder to achieve measurables for success. And that's where the sane part comes into in the business model itself that's created.
Yeah, and that's why I call it "Are you insane?" Because that is a quick question. Because I know of a very successful entrepreneur here in Brooklyn. I don't want to allude to anything more than that, but I was going to work with one of his brand managers who fits. He was in charge of the P&L and strategic for that brand, and this guy owned a number of brands. And I walked in, I knew immediately I was going to have a problem. He absolutely would not. He said anything that smacks of corporate America, he doesn't want. Now, he was worth billions of dollars. I have to say, I haven't followed up in the last 4 or 5 years, but he was sure dint of will. But I also know that the industry he's in went through a major disruption right about the time that I was talking to him. This was 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know how he's doing now. My guess is his will is so incredibly strong, and he's in a community that's very tight, that he's probably done all right. But that was an example of someone who absolutely would not listen. I mean, to the point where he really, I just could tell the interview, I was fighting for my life, and I figured he's not going to rubber stamp me to work with this guy anyhow. But he would not budge from the belief that that is the death of any company, is putting in these structures.
So I highly disagree with that.
I do too. Totally. That's why I fought with it.
There is a fear of being corporate, and there's being too corporate and stuffy, where you can't share ideas and change a momentum without too much pressure or too many hurdles to jump through. That's not what I'm talking about. What we're talking about. We're talking about the fact the corporate structure. You need to have structure in your business. Granted, it doesn't need to be stuffy. You don't need to, you don't need to make it overbearing and difficult for employees to be employees and share ideas. But you need to have processes in place. If not, then you have employees with no roles doing anything, right?
And everything.
And that's not conducive to using people effectively. In a way, if you look at Henry Ford's model for the car, the production line, that was very successful because people had a role and a job. Granted, not the most exciting for the employee, but they did their jobs very well because they knew what they were doing. There was structure there. Every employee that you hire can't have the title of, head salesperson, right? Because then who's taking the orders and processing? You need to define roles, and that is a structure.
Right. I believe it was also the automotive industry that introduced the concept of an org chart, a hierarchical way of organizing yourself.
By sheer nature of having an org chart, you are now inviting corporate notions and concepts into your business. So I think we get too afraid of that word. In fact, I looked at my company as not being very corporate. We didn't want to be stuffy, but we still had processes and procedures for every role and every expectation. And we had measurables, and we had, an org chart, and we had employee reviews every quarter, because that's what you need to grow a company, to keep track on the progress, to keep people knowing what they have to do. Because employees without guidance will fail, right? Just like your kids, without guidance, they're not going to be productive members of society. They're going to be running around in the streets doing whatever they want. Kids need a bedtime at some point.
And again, kids running around the street, there's a day they may, again, it's these trappings of success. There's a great movie I love called Once Upon a Time in America by Sergio Leone, where really they stay scrappy and all sorts of crap happens to them, but some of them are successful. It's a movie, so it's a myth. That scrappiness, will, determination, hard work is the American ethos. But I believe it, but there is a reality that at some point you do have to get rid of the scrappiness to a certain extent and put in a structure that makes it look like you can't be scrappy. My best example of the war between structure and culture and the belief that you're going to kill your culture if you put in too much structure was when I was working for Brooklyn Academy of Music. It was a pro bono project I did. They're right around the corner. And I finally at one point got the argument down that they discovered on their own that putting in structure had nothing to do with culture. It wasn't going to impact them. In fact, and this was the key selling point, was putting in the right structures was going to make their life easier so they could do the sort of stuff they love. So even in creative industries, performing arts, which you think that must be the hardest to put in structure by nature of the chaos that creativity needs, even the team at Brooklyn Academy of Music suddenly realized that if they just had some structure and some processes, that they could actually do more of what they loved, which was the creative stuff, the fun sort of brainstorming and so forth. So, so we're sort of running out of time, depending on how long we thought this was going to go. What is a myth or myths that we haven't addressed yet that you think needs to be talked about?
Well, we briefly talked about how an entrepreneur is not always the manager, the boss, or the CEO, and I think it's a really important one. And you know, I've seen several businesses have some challenges and trouble, and you know, with the pandemic disappear because the person who thought of the concept was also the one that had to run it in their head. Right. And I think ego gets in the way with that. It's, you know, again, just because you have a great concept and idea doesn't make you the experiential one that's going to be leading and managing and holding people accountable. So I think that's one of the biggest ones out there is, you know, you can invent an idea, but you should have people that can help guide you. And I think also that entrepreneurs do need to be loners is a big myth. I've always had consultants in my life and people that have, you know, mentored me. And I do the same for others because you need someone to help guide you along the way. You don't know what you don't know.
Right. And it gets you to a certain point, as you said, when you don't have experience and you feel invincible. But again, at some point, sanity has to come in. And that's in the form usually of an external person or persons who let you know where you could run afoul.
And you also need to be held accountable. Yeah, more often than not, a CEO or an entrepreneur turned CEO who has no partners is on an island of their own and no one to hold them accountable. And that's where they start meddling and chasing shiny things. Right. There is, you know, you're not your own boss in a way, even though you are, you're not. You have accountabilities and you can't act that way because if you act that way, then you start meddling and getting too comfortable and complacent and start taking the company apart, going backwards. I've seen that happen way too often.
Here's a myth that I just thought of that has affected some of my clients, which is entrepreneurs have to be unique and the ideas have to be unicorn ideas. They have to be.
Not true.
I think it's
the concept for my telecom company is we're going to be the best known telecom company for customer service in the industry. How many companies in the world say they're great at customer service? Everyone. Name a single company that says we suck at customer service and we deliver.
Or at least make that part of their value proposition.
Right? Yeah. Everyone says that, but to do it is something totally and completely different and extremely challenging to do.
Yeah. One last myth, which is that you have to be disruptive. Your idea has to be disruptive, which is sort of a takeoff on that, which is disrupt, as Bezos says, and I'm actually going to address it immediately because I wrote a book on that. Jeff Bezos said, more stays the same than changes in a disruptive moment or a disruptive company. And I think that's really true. Sometimes it's just a small little change to an existing business model, like making sure your customer service is great. It's a small thing to say and a big thing to do, but that little change, when everything else is the same, makes all the world difference in the world.
Well, most of the successful companies that you know of or successful products are just iterations and slight improvements to another.
Right.
And that is, again, back to my telecom example, we were taking telecommunications and adding a layer of customer service to it. We didn't invent telecom. We didn't invent the wheel. We just supported it better. Right. So it wasn't disruptive by any means. Yes, when you have a disruptive change, there is a greater likelihood of becoming a mega business. But there's also a really great, in fact, the chips are against you, of failure, because the world might not be ready for the Apple Newton.
Yeah. And I always think of Elon Musk as probably having the biggest disruptive concept out there. I mean, he wants to disrupt the car industry, the oil and gas industry, transportation industry. He took on some really big industries. And let's face it.
Industry, and he did. Right. He disrupted the industry, but with lots of backing and lots of marketing and lots of fuel and powder behind
and personal sacrifice too. Yeah. We know moments where he truly acted insane.
Now, if you're looking at Elon Musk as the example, is yes, Tesla became a disruptor in the industry, but how many Teslas prior were disruptors that failed? How many electric cars were out there? Right. You can say that the Prius, being a hybrid, was the original disruptor, and the Prius does have very good revenue numbers over the years. Right. So the credit has gone to Elon Musk as the disruptor, although he wasn't the disruptor.
Right. Well, and it's
disruptors failed before him.
Usually, great disruptors are not the first movers.
Correct. And again, I bring up the Apple Newton. The Apple Newton was the first PDA in existence. I had one of those pieces of garbage. Right. It barely worked. It was an awesome concept. Fast forward 10, 12 years, and you had BlackBerry devices. You had the Palm Trio and the Palm 5. Those were the disruptors that changed the industry and the way we go about daily work and organization. Right. But the Newton essentially put Apple in some real big hot water. They had to bring back Steve Jobs to figure out how to get past their blunder, their failure that almost took them off the planet.
Although the real failure was firing him anyways. That was the real failure.
That's a cultural dialogue about cultural mismatches and a person with way too much ego and insanity.
Right, exactly. Well, awesome. I know we could talk like for another hour and a half on this topic. We have already discussed doing a follow-up to this. It's probably going to be around this thing of entrepreneurs having to work within ecosystems and accept the fact that they aren't their own boss, because we touched on quite a lot of points. So that will be sometime in May or June. Our schedule is fairly full right now, but Darren's always been a source of inspiration to myself and wisdom. So, and I do know that there's a lot of interest in this broadcast that we're doing now. So we will be back, and everybody who's attended will be getting information about the next LinkedIn Live with Darren Moss. So thank you, Darren. It was great. You got me now thinking, and I actually have to go on to my next meeting, which will require some creativity, but this has been awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed these.
Yes, thank you.